and start and welcome everyone. Hi, I'm Mary Dahlgren from Oklahoma City. And first of all, we are working on putting up the link so you can get your handouts. I don't know if everyone has been to the page where you can download all of the handouts, because there is about a 13-page handout that goes with this. We won't be going through every single bit that's in there, but it will be a good resource for you to use. On the sound walls, there's some pictures of the sound walls. In your handouts, the two charts that I have over here will come up in your sound walls. And those are in color, so you can reference those and refer to those. And so we will begin to launch. Thank you for putting that up. Do you want to put it? ODE homepage.
Yeah, and then go to Learning in Ohio.
Learning in Ohio.
How fast I should go here. And then literacy. And then Ohio's Striving Readers Comprehensive Literacy Grant. And then there's Literacy Academy from there. So there's kind of some breadcrumbs to follow.
Maybe.
Or,
you know what we might do is we might tape it on the back door, and you could always take a picture of that so that you would have that in order to know where to go. Thank you so much. Yeah, a little lengthy.
Also, Striving Readers Literacy Academy 2019, you should find it.
Yeah. I'm wondering if there was a link in an email with all the instructions, but I didn't see one, so I don't know. All right, well, again, welcome to my session on sound walls from speech to print. And I have some fun information to share with you, hopefully practical things. My first question is, how many of you all have attended letters training? I saw someone in the back. A couple of people have attended letters or no letters. A lot of this information comes from all of the years that I've spent as a national letters trainer and working with Dr. Louisa Moats and the instruction around phonology and articulation and speech sounds. Anybody in the room an SLP? Yes? All right. So it's always nice to have SLPs in here to help us think about what it is that's happening with our students, why they have difficulties, and I think every building has access to an SLP. They usually have very high caseloads, but they have all of this information also, so they're a great resource to go to when talking about kids who have issues that you're seeing a struggle with and you're not quite sure what's happening. So we'll get into that as we go through. I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about Linnea Aries' phases of reading development. I tie this to Aries' phases of reading development because I think that it's important to know how do children move through these phases of reading, and that we can't skip one phase in order to get to that outcome of reading fluently and proficiently. There are things that come in between that. We'll talk about the phonological continuum. As I said in your handout, you have a very long handout. I have a handout that has lots of information about the different steps of phonological awareness all the way to phonemic awareness with some little activities. I'm not going to spend time doing all those things today because I want to get to the sound walls, and you all want to know what does that look like and sound like. We'll talk about the articulatory features of the speech sounds in English, and that's really where sound walls come from and what to do with them, and then how to use a sound wall in your classroom as an instructional tool. So what is this really going to look like when I go into my classroom and take it back? Here's a picture. This is actually from Canton City Schools, and my colleague Debbie Hartwig used this in that school. She put up a sound wall, and teachers started working with this. So our goal is by the end of the session that you have some understanding of what this seems all out of order and why have you put it together this way. My goal is that you will understand a little bit about how this is arranged. I want to point out we have the consonants on the left side here and the vowels on the right side. Again, as we go through the session, hopefully that will make more sense to you as we move through this and in your understanding of how do we use this as a reference tool. So sound walls rather than word walls. That's really one of the things that we're pushing for, and getting you to think and expand your thinking around how do we help kids become more efficient in learning to read, and how do we connect it to the learner viewpoint. So this is a graphic that actually comes from Marianne Wolf's book, Proust and the Squid. But the important thing about this is understanding in our brain, and if you take your right hand and put your hand in a fist, this represents what the left side of your brain looks like, because reading occurs on the left side of the brain. We know that with confidence. The science tells us that. And you'll see back here in this green area, so back here on my thumb, the area of my thumb joint, that's that visual word form area. That's activated first as a reader when I'm looking at the print. Up here, you'll see where the red is on the slide, but that's up here on this front knuckle. That's where phonology comes in. So kind of an interesting thing is reading doesn't take place in one area of the brain. All these neurons have to connect in many different places, and they have to travel up through this area that's called the angular gyrus. So that's my top knuckle there. I have to connect the speech and the print in order for my students to become proficient readers. So I have to teach to the different areas of the brain. We tend to start with just the print, and we don't think about all the speech. We leave that to the speech pathologist, but what do we know about sounds? And students, how do they come at the learning process from the sound perspective? So what does it take to retain sight words? Here's one of my things. I have in your handouts, you have blanks. And so I would say fill in the blanks. But what do you need? That's what's my real goal of a sound wall, is that my students become those proficient readers. They're reading efficiently so we can get to meaning more rapidly. Well, what do you need in order? I have to have lots of sight words. I have to know words instantly and automatically in order to be able to focus on meaning. So one, I need phonemic analysis, segmenting and blending along with manipulation. I'll talk about that for just a minute when we look at the continuum of phonemic awareness. And I highly encourage you to go to David Kilpatrick's talk, he'll be talking a lot about those higher levels of phonemic awareness and moving into that manipulation, those manipulation tasks, deletion, substitution, addition. Those are areas that we've often left out. We've stopped at segmenting and blending. So we'll talk a little bit about that, but that is necessary in order for our students to retain sight words. They also need to know major grapheme phoneme correspondences. Not just single letters, but groups of letters that represent sounds. So I need to be able to recognize those rapidly and automatically and put those together. I will say, if your children, how many of you guys teach kindergarten, first and second grade? Okay, do you all have kids that have a hard time retaining sight words? So one of the things we know is there's not going to be a large retention of sight words if they don't know letter names and if they're not phonemically aware. You can flash all the cards you want to at your kids, but if I'm not phonemically aware and I don't know my letter names, they're not going to be retained. So that's a really important insight. And I will say, I work in a school district in Oklahoma City Public Schools, and I had to convince the kindergarten teachers, my first year that I started working with them, about 4 years ago, they said their goal was that their kindergartners know 120 words. I said, how's that working for you guys? They said, well, it doesn't work that well. And I said, just because you say it doesn't mean it happens, right? So we decided, I convinced them, let's cut it in half. Let's go to 60. Because what happens, we say we want our kindergartners to know 120, and we give them flashcards, we put them on rings and send them home day after day, and we flash them at kids. And they learn some, but then they go to first grade, and guess what the first grade teachers tell me? These kids don't, they know the. They know said, they know But they don't know that whole list of sight words. So what is it going to take to retain those? So I convinced the kindergarten teachers to trust me, trust the process. That was big. But actually thinking about, let's teach phonemic awareness and let's teach letter names. And let's work on that all the way up until winter break. And then after winter break, then we will start introducing sight words. That doesn't mean that you're not going to be blending sounds together prior to that, but that understanding that they have to know and recognize those sight words, that's going to come a little bit later. And the idea of flashing these lines and squiggles and circles on a card at kids and thinking, well, they're just going to remember that, is not very effective. So knowing these pieces about what does it take to remember sight words, to retain those, not just identify them, but to recognize them. And when I recognize sight words, that means I know them whether they're on a card or they're in text. Because you guys have kids also that you can flash the cards at them, and then they read sentences and it's like they've never seen the word the before in their lives. Right? So there's identification and there's recognition. We want them to be to that recognition point. And we'll talk about that a little bit further as we go into this. They need to know about syllabic sound spelling patterns and moving into more advanced instruction. And they need to be able to read unfamiliar words on their own. And that's the real tipping point. And I'm going to use a term that you'll see a little bit later in the slides. The term is orthographic mapping. I'm going to have you guys say that. Orthographic mapping. Orthographic mapping. Orthographic mapping is when children move to that point where they can read unfamiliar words on their own. David Scher refers to this as the self-teaching hypothesis. This idea that once I learn how the print works, I can read more than just the words that you've taught me. I can read other words because I have that ability to, it's that orthographic mapping that's kicking in. I can read unfamiliar words because I know how to map speech to print. And then I'm reading more and more fluently, I'm reading with accuracy, and now my comprehension is going up, up, up. And that's what we want for our students. But we have to have these precursors have to be in place in order for our students to be able to do that. So I have, in your handouts, again, you have this continuum of Aries phases of reading development. So Aries starts off with a pre-alphabetic phase. And this is usually pre-K, children coming into pre-K, where they're not really familiar with letters. They write with scribbles. They say things like, when they see the Golden Arches environmental print, that says McDonald's, even though it doesn't say McDonald's, but they know there's meaning associated with print. But they don't have any way to map sounds and print together yet, but there's a little bit of understanding around that. We move into the early alphabetic phase, and in this phase, we have students starting to learn letter names and some sounds, and there's some phonology going on. So that awareness of rhyming, alliteration, syllable segmentation, first sound awareness, all of that begins happening at this early alphabetic phase, and you see children, when they're reading, they make errors like this. I'm reading the word house, but I say home. Okay, close approximation. They're still drawing back onto this phase, what makes sense, but they're not attending to the print yet. And initially, we don't become real alarmed about this, but if I don't read the words accurately, it's going to change the meaning of the text. And so we really want to attend to that and move children through this phase to the later alphabetic phase where they are matching the speech to the print and they're reading the words correctly. We don't want them guessing. In the later alphabetic phase, that's where we're really starting to map not just single letters, but when I see the CK, I know that says what sound? K. And when I see IGH, I know that says I. Those are things that are happening when I move from the early to later alphabetic phase. I'm able to segment and blend phonemes. And this is usually in first grade, moving into second grade for sure. And when children are reading words like the word sweet here, we have it sound by sound. Eat. They're not guessing, they're actually matching that sound to the print. So moving through these two stages are the stages where I find oftentimes we don't slow down enough for kids. This should be happening in kindergarten through 2nd grade, these 2 stages. And this is where we're kind of deconstructing text a little bit. I'm going from meaning-based to now I have to look at the print, I have to figure out how the print works, and then as we get to the consolidated phase, I'm reading whole words and I'm back to that self-teaching hypothesis. I'm not having to break everything down because I've moved through those phases. And now I can do things like I can use associations and analogies. I know one word, so I can figure out another word. That's what happens in the consolidated phase of reading. And here, if you'll notice our academic phonemic or advanced phonemic awareness, we have deletion, substitution, and deletion. So the idea of moving through these phases of phonemic awareness are really important in those beginning stages of reading. So we move from early to later, later to consolidated, and all these phases of phonemic awareness are important, and that's where this is going to come into play with our sound walls and thinking about the articulatory features of our language. So for our weak readers, children that are struggling, phonological skills are essential for all levels of reading development. We just saw that as we went through Aries phases. Oftentimes for our kids that are struggling readers, in spite of the fact that they are working hard to learn the information, oftentimes the primary cause of their reading difficulties is a phonological core deficit. So again, as we go into these sound walls, talking about how do we create that awareness and anchor those sounds for children's understanding. And then phonemic awareness skills, David Kilpatrick says they're underrated. And I will say, I think that for a long time we thought we know what phonemic awareness is, and if any of you all have used some of our screeners like Dibbles or Ames Web, even the basic assessment skills, they have phoneme segmentation and phoneme blending, but that's where they stop. And so we thought, well, if we get kids to that point, we're good to go. And we're finding there's another level of phonemic awareness that we need to take into consideration. And I think that that's where Kilpatrick's work has become so popular. The other thing that we know, students are inadequately assessed beyond 1st grade. We often, after 1st grade, we don't assess phonemic awareness at those deeper levels. So that's an important thing to think about. When I have a child who's a struggling reader, what is it? It's not just letter recognition, and it's not just that they can't read sight words, but what is it when they're attaching the sound to the print? What do they know about the phonology of our language? So, as I said, I created and included a continuum of phonological awareness, and thinking about this continuum from easy tasks to more difficult tasks. And one of the things that I think is really important for teachers of beginning readers or struggling readers to know is what's an easy task and what's a more difficult task. And if I have a program that I'm teaching, if I'm using to teach phonemic awareness tasks and my students can't do it, where should I back up? What's an alternate thing to do, and how do I know that? So here's a continuum, again, this is all in your handouts, of thinking about phonological awareness. So this whole continuum, the stair steps are all phonological awareness. And you'll notice right here, as we get to the step where the green bar is, this is where the phoneme level, phonemic awareness begins. So phonemic awareness being a subcategory of phonological awareness. So we begin with compound words. If the word is cowboy, and I say cowboy, put it together, what do I have? Cowboy. And if I take off cow, what's left? Boy, and I put it back together, I have cowboy. Okay, that's easy enough because I'm working with whole words. That makes sense. And you guys, I encourage you, use pictures. Find pictures, clip art, whatever, and find a picture of a tooth and a brush, and then a picture of a toothbrush, and put those things together. Kids who are English language learners, they're struggling readers. I worked with a 3rd grader the other day, and we were doing this, and he says to me, "Lady, I don't know what you're doing. I don't know what you're talking about." And I thought, okay, I need to back up and explain to him when we're playing with words, because he was really struggling. and he'd been struggling since mid-first grade. And I thought, where are you on the phonological continuum? Because I need to know where to enter in on instruction. Well, I know if I'd used pictures and provided the instruction that he needed, he would move through this continuum relatively quickly, and I'd find the real sticking point for him. But he had no conceptual understanding of what I was asking him to do. So compound words, moving from whole words to syllables, parts of words. So if I have a word like magnet, and I put it together, I have magnet, take off mag, what's left? Net. Put it back together, the word is magnet, take off net, what's left? Mag. So I can work with word parts, and I can do 2 syllables and 3 syllables. I can do 1 syllable words, helping them to recognize syllables. Then we move to onset rhyme, a smaller chunk, taking off that initial sound, or it might be an initial blend, which I always use my thumb and my hand to teach onset rhyme. So I say the word is shop. If I say shh, what's the rest of the word? Op. Put it back together, what's the word? Shop. All right, you guys do one with me. Hold your hands up and get your thumb ready. So the word is made. What word? Made. Stick your thumb up for the first sound. The rest of the word, aid. Pull it back together. Made. So we have onset rhyme. Usually with my struggling readers, I give them the sound that's on my thumb, and I ask them for the rest of the word, that chunk, because I'm moving from compound words to syllables to that rhyme portion of the word. And our goal is to get, when they can start telling me that first sound, I know I'm ready to move to that phoneme level, that first sound. And really, early on in kindergarten, we're hoping that our kids are getting to this level pretty rapidly. If not, and I have lots of English language learners where I have to go back and move through these lower steps, but we want our kids to get to that phoneme level, to phonemic awareness as quickly as possible. That ability to isolate, identify, categorize different sounds. So now I'm just working with single sounds, identifying sounds one at a time, pulling off the sound, giving them 3 words that have the same beginning sound and asking them to tell me what is that beginning sound. So that's our first step. Blending, of course, pulling those sounds together, segmenting, and again, first grade, we should be able to do this, definitely 4 and 5 sounds that I can blend and segment. And then by the end of the year, first grade and definitely into second grade, we're going to delete sounds, add sounds, substitute sounds. That's all at the phonemic awareness level. So this top step is the one that we're talking about, especially with older kids that are struggling readers and oftentimes have a hard time doing those skills. So I'm going to, again, Kilpatrick, he has passed the Phonological Awareness Skills Test, that screening test. It's free. You can download it if you look up the past with David Kilpatrick's name, and it actually goes through every one of these levels. And it's an easy screener to use to pinpoint where do I need to begin my instruction. So it's important to understand this as a teacher. And again, as I said, what if I'm working on segmenting and my students can't segment? Where do I go? Well, I could keep segmenting louder, longer, right? Or I can go back to blending. If they can't blend, I can go back to isolating and categorizing and identifying those single sounds. So knowing the continuum and how to move around is important. It's also important to be smarter than your program. I often find that our programs mix these things up, and that's really tough. And I find in kindergarten, oftentimes the syllable level is taught in January. And it's kind of like, well, how about if we move syllables to the earlier part of the year, and we want to work on single phonemes by the time I'm in January and February roll around. So thinking about how this continuum works, being smarter than your program, because I know this as good instruction is occurring. So, all right, why? Because we match sounds to print. We need to know that that print represents the sounds, and I need to be able to play with and manipulate those sounds in order to be that proficient reader. A student who doesn't understand that a word can be broken into phonemes cannot understand which letters match that sound because he doesn't understand the sounds. So really important things to think about as we're learning about phonemic awareness. And here's my term that I used earlier. What is it? Orthographic mapping. What is it? Orthographic mapping. So you'll see this slide again, but the idea of forming connections. So the spelling, I have the word dog, and I need to connect it to the sounds d, a, g. And this is the glue, the speech to the print. And that's what we're really talking about as we talk about sound walls. I really want to think about those sounds and match them to that print. There's also meaning that goes with that. And as my meaning's activated, I activate a picture of the dog. Of course, this is my dog, who I think is the cutest dog in the world. So this isn't just identifying dog, but for me, this is Rebel Ann. I can recognize Rebel whenever I see any other Cavalier King Charles. I know my dog. So there's a recognition versus identifying, not just putting a label on dog, but recognizing her. And that's what we want, sight word recognition. So it's not just I can identify that word, but I recognize it regardless of what situation that word is in. So again, another analogy that I use for this, I can say my dog, I recognize my dog, but what if what if I asked one of you all to take a note into the ballroom downstairs, and I wanted you to deliver it to someone? One, you need to know the characteristics of the person that you're going to deliver that note to. So I say, well, the person is tall, the person is bald, the person is wearing glasses. Do you have some features that you can now identify? Probably. You can eliminate a lot of people in the room by being able to identify those characteristics and features. So when I'm talking about teaching words, I know the features of the sounds. I recognize the letters. I know if I notice the difference between straight lines and slanted lines and curves. So I'm learning about the features of the letters until that's automatic for me. I can anchor those sounds to that print, and I can recognize it anywhere I go. Well, you go and deliver this note to, we'll say, to Larry, and you deliver the note to Larry, and then the next day, tomorrow, you see Larry walking around the conference, and you say, oh, I can identify that person. But let's say next week, you're at the grocery store, and Larry's there. But guess what? Larry has contacts on, he has on a baseball cap, and he's wearing workout clothes. He's not in his suit. Is it going to be easy to recognize Larry in the grocery store? Not in the same situation here. Is Larry, like, would it maybe be difficult to say, oh, that's the same guy that was from the conference? Maybe, maybe not. Recognition is I can recognize Larry regardless of if it's downstairs in the ballroom when he's in a suit or if he's at the grocery store and looks different. Your BFF, think about your BFF. You recognize your BFF, whether dressed up to go out one night or if he or she is getting out of the swimming pool soaking wet, because those are two very different looks, right? So recognizing, regardless of the situation, that's what we have to understand. So do I understand the characteristics, the features, the sounds that the print represents? All of those things are things that we're building on as we're looking at our sound walls. So orthographic mapping. My goal here, when you leave, that you'll consider shifting from a word wall to a sound wall and what that might look like. So current word walls. This is what I've noticed when I'm in classrooms. They tend to be A to Z most of the time, 26 letters, all right? The words are listed by the first letter. Yes? Everybody agrees that's pretty typical. The focus tends to be different in every classroom. When I go into classrooms, I see some teachers doing lots of interactive things with their word walls. They have sight words, then they have sometimes vocabulary words, and they have everybody's name on it, and names do not actually work well with the letters and the sounds. Like, oh man, names can really be confusing, especially today. Or in some classrooms, word walls, they function as wallpaper. My district told me I had to have one up. I put it up, and it just stays the same the rest of the year. So our goal is to move from those word walls, and this is a classroom that I went in. This is the teacher who had to have the word wall up, right? You see it? Word wall. and I'm looking at this, and I'm thinking, wow, there is no rhyme or reason to this. And I said, why why did you put this up? Because I was told I had to. How did you select the words? So you have dinosaur and you have goes and took. Like the words, there's no rhyme or reason to this. And the teacher said, well, this was a first-year teacher, and said, well, I was just told to put it up. I didn't know what I was supposed to do with it. Okay, that's fair. Let's talk about that. Let's see what we can do. I mean, at least go A through Z. I'd be happy with A through Z for this, right? So at least the kids knew where to look to find the words. This is the more typical word wall that we see in our classrooms. So again, my goal is to get you to think about shifting from that to something like this as we think about sound walls, organizing by sound as opposed to just the first letter. So here's a little activity for you all to do. I'd like for you to take a minute and think about if you have word walls in your classroom. If you don't, think about word walls that you've seen in your buildings. What are 3 words that you find on a word wall under the letter T, under the letter S, under the letter A, I, and O? See if you can come up with 3 words. And if just maybe one person at the table, each of you come up with 1 word, you can share with the people at your table what you came up with. Take a minute, turn and talk. I'm going to give you guys these 2. Have some little mirrors here for people because we're going to use this to look at our mouth. You going to help me? Sure. I already gave them to them. Back of the back. Okay, so what were some words that you said you had on your word walls? The, say, they, to, T-O, T-W-O, T-O-O, one under the O. Yeah, so these are some of the ones that I put up that I find are popular. The, to, this. See, she, should. Do you guys see those? Are, at, Okay, you guys start thinking about sound. Look at the sound versus just the first letter. So I keep asking, teacher, where's one? And I'm thinking, as a 5, 6-year-old, and you keep saying it's under the O. And then I say, okay, teacher, where's of? And you say, it's under the O. And so now I'm thinking, this doesn't make any sense. Okay, where's the? I'm looking on the wall, where's the? And you tell me it's under the T, right? So how do students come at this versus how do we as adults approach this learning? Well, one, we've always done A through Z. That's how word walls started out. And we haven't really thought about the sound as much as we've thought about the print and just looking at letters. So my husband's assisting me in passing out little mirrors for you all. So if you don't have a mirror, what do you need? More? All right, you might have to... We'll see what we can come up with. So thinking about, okay, see, and then she and should. What about she and should? They start with what sound? Shh. Okay, so here's the first thing I'm going to tell you. Sound walls and changing to the organization of the way that these are organized have to do with where the sound is in your mouth. All right? So I'll explain that as we go through. But if nothing else, if you leave this presentation and you're thinking, well, I'm not ready to take the dive into the whole sound walls, at least add the digraphs and add long and short vowels and vowel teams to your sound wall so that kids are no longer reading the word the as he. They read he. And you're like, wait, why do you say that? It's th. And you're like, but even when we build words, if I'm building words and I have a separate card for a T and an H, as opposed to what if I had TH on one tile and I learn, oh, that's one sound. Now things begin to make sense to me as I'm thinking about how do we build words? How do I think about sounds? Because those two letters make how many sounds? TH makes one sound, right? So I might as well have those on a letter tile together when I'm building words. The same thing with SH and WH and PH. Like those are things, thinking about what makes more sense. And again, as I'm thinking of the learner perspective here, as a young child, I'm thinking about sound because I don't know how to spell it. If I knew how to spell it, I wouldn't say, teacher, what about? Teacher, how do you spell? But I know the sounds, and if I can identify the sounds, then I can start looking for the sound and the spelling on the wall and making connections with that. And so we're going to move into that. Again, these are words that you guys probably identified on your word walls, but thinking about why that might cause confusion for kids. This is the way we've always done it. So just expanding our thinking about how we might do this differently to help kids and be more efficient about that. So I've already kind of talked about those confusions. Other limitations, so we use letter names. We don't even really think about sound when we do word walls. Where there's a disregard. Sometimes shape is really emphasized. You don't learn to read by shape. And I have to say, I say that because when I was in my undergrad, in my elementary ed program, we did a lot of this. We cut out words like this a lot. And I still see kids outlining words, but there's nothing that makes that connection, that phonological and orthographic connection, as I talked about our brain earlier, that has to do with shape. So that might be fun, it might look nice, but it doesn't have anything to do with how do I read. And then the expectation for memorization, just to memorize those words, as opposed to learning how to apply the speech to print maxim that we want to be teaching from. So sound walls, and I use what I call kidlips, and I'm going to share some of the kidlips with you and talk about this sound wall. So the sound wall is set up according to the articulation of speech sounds. So I'm going to push you to think about that a little bit, and that's why you have some mirrors to look at. Producing the sounds, moving from the front of your mouth to the back of the throat. So we'll start with our consonant chart, and I know it's hard to see from back in the back, but we will start with, that's how this is arranged, with our lips together, then we'll put our teeth on our lips, our tongue between the teeth, the tip of your tongue is behind your teeth, touching behind. Your lips are rounded and your middle of your tongue is up. I'll talk through each one of these, but I just want you to know the back of the tongue is lifted, so the root of the tongue is lifting up, and then there's a sound that just comes through your throat, that sound. So from the front of your mouth to the back of your mouth is the way this is arranged. And then we'll talk about the vowel sounds, how they start with a tight smile, as in cheese, and they go all the way down to the doctor sound, so that slight opening of each vowel sound, and then they round as we go up. So just to kind of give you a big overview of what those look like. We're approaching things from a learner viewpoint rather than a teacher or an adult viewpoint. We're anchoring to teach letter sound knowledge using articulatory gestures. So that's what I'm really going to push you to think about as we do this. And then we'll attach phonemes to orthographic patterns, to graphemes. So when I say sound wall, but we're going to put print on it. We're going to approach it from sound, but we are going to add the print because I'm going to read. It's all about reading, so I have to look at the print anyway. All right, so two purposes that we have, attending to articulation, how many of you guys have, this is a new thing that I'm hearing all the time, are you all identifying more and more kids for speech? As a speech pathologist, I'm interested to know. So I see heads nodding. I have a lot of pre-K administrators and kindergarten teachers say, we have more and more kids that need speech. And again, I know one person said she was a speech path. There's not enough time in the day for all of our speech paths to attend to all of our children. So the idea of what can we do as classroom teachers? So these are little things that you can do to provide really great instruction for reading instruction, but it has everything to do with noticing the sounds and how do I pronounce the sounds in words. And I notice with my older students, my middle school students who they don't say complete words. They drop off endings. They drop syllables out. They mumble a lot because they're unaware of the sounds in our language. So let's just make that part of our practice and our instruction. So attending to articulation, and the whole idea as we talk about what we say articulatory gestures. For example, everybody say the sound, the t sound. Say t. So when you're saying that sound, notice what's your tongue doing? T. Is it lifting up or is it staying flat behind is it going behind your top teeth or bottom teeth? Top teeth. And does it stay there or does it drop back down? T, t, t. You kind of touch up behind your teeth and then it goes back down. That's when I'm talking about the articulatory gestures and thinking about that. That helps to concretize the phonemes, noticing like this is what you do when you make this sound. Watch me. And you're going to look in your mirrors and I'll say, make your mouth look like my mouth. Try it again. So those are little things that I can do whole group or small group or individually, depending upon what my students need. So helping to hold on to those phonemes because you say a sound and it's over. But if I have something to hold on to, thinking about what do I do when I make that sound, then I'm able to hold on to that. I have more information to connect to. Attention is focused on various graphemes and patterns representing phonemes, so that's part of what happens in our sound wall, and providing access to and discussion around the various ways we spell words. So that will come up as you start teaching about sound walls, because when we start talking especially about our vowel sounds, wow, we've got a lot of options for spelling. And so how do we introduce those spellings hopefully in a systematic way? So we're building lists for instruction. Probably oftentimes through our own programs we're doing that. There's a lot of research to support this idea of sound walls, so I put that in there. You will notice Linnea Airy's name comes up over and over again because she's been working on this for years. That's why I use her phases of reading development and all the study and research that she's done around the articulatory gestures and why that's so important. I should say I am not a speech pathologist. I have training in this, and I've worked with these types of things for a long time, but it's come out of the necessity to figure out what do I do to close the gap for kids, because I have a number of children that have been identified as tier 3 that with good remediation will be moved out of that 3rd tier. I have lots of EL students who are long-term ELs, and we need to stop that. We need to interrupt that. So what can we do in order to do that? And so figuring out and studying the research to kind of guide how do we make the shifts? How do we interrupt these downward spirals for many of our children, and understanding what can I do in a general ed classroom? So as I've said, our traditional word walls, we've talked about these things. Sound walls promote speech to print. Kids come at it from speech to print. I think about the sound. First sound in one, I'm thinking sound, I don't know the letter name. And I'm trying to think of it as sound. A sound wall is organized by sounds. We attach phonemes to the graphemes. We'll add print. Comes from the learner perspective, and it fosters the understanding of our language system when I'm talking about those articulatory gestures and features of the language. And it's a tool for teaching and learning. It's designed to be interactive and engaging for students. So how do we begin? We start with teaching the articulation of phonemes. And if you haven't opened your mirrors, go ahead and open them up. I hope there's not any broken ones. Sometimes they get broken in transportation. But if you currently have a word wall, you're going to have to expand that because there's 44 phonemes in the English language. How many letters? 26. So I really need to start thinking about, I'm going to have to expand that if we're going to have 44 phonemes to work with. You build a sound wall as you teach the phonemes and add graphemes as they're introduced. I say if you teach kindergarten, start with common consonants and short vowels, but we're going to expand that also, even for kindergarten and first grade. If you've already introduced graphemes, add mouth pictures to the wall, or make sure that you have mirrors. And even putting a mirror on the wall and having mirrors for kids to look at so they can see, what is my mouth doing when I make that sound? And I'm making connections with those. Repetition, repetition, repetition. If you just saw Anita Archer, practice, practice, practice. That's what we need to do. Revisit words that are posted on your sound wall on a regular basis. Talk about what's happening when you're making those sounds. One thing I added in here is that keep your alphabet strips posted, because we're not talking about throwing out alphabetical order. We still use alphabetical order, but for our sound wall, we're talking about sounds. So there's two different things that are happening there. Definitely keep alphabet posted in alphabetical order and all those things too, because that's a question that comes up. So here we have speech, our place of articulation, so where in the mouth the sound originates, and then down here on this side is what we do with our voice. And so I'd like for everybody to say the sound and feel your vocal cords. Do you feel a vibration? If you can't feel it there, and sometimes kids have a hard time feeling it, you can put your hands over your ears and try it. Say, You should feel it resonating in your head as you're feeling that. And sometimes kids are better at doing that, and they like covering up their ears, right? So that's a voice sound. Now say the p sound. You shouldn't feel any voicing there. That's what we call an unvoiced sound. And again, if you put your hands over your ears, p, 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 you won't hear that. You won't feel that vibration or that resonation when you're making that sound. So voiced and unvoiced sounds. And we're going to talk about the airflow of what's happening when you make these sounds. And so we'll start with our first two sets of sounds. So I'm going to tell you these. We'll talk about each one of these on the top row, and these are called stop sounds. So if you have your mirrors, if you've opened them, you might look in your mirror and make the sound that you see here. Let's start with the unvoiced sound. So we always list the unvoiced sound first, the p sound. P, p. So can you describe to the person next to you, what are you doing with your lips when you make that sound? P. Are they open or are they together? They're together. They're pushed together. And does the air come out of your mouth when you say that sound? P. Yes. And so there's a quick push of breath, and that's what this air cloud is just representing, that it's just a pop of breath, because we don't say pa. We don't want to do that. It's just the stop. It's a stop sound. We call it a stop sound because the air stops. It's just a quick push of breath. And then the voice sound is b. So look in your mouth and say that sound. B. Now say the p sound. P, b, p, b. Do you notice that your mouth is doing the same thing? Kids confuse these sounds a lot. When I first started learning this, I thought, oh my gosh, I have kids that are reversing P's and B's. They weren't reversing P's and B's. They were confusing p and b. because when they're speaking, they'll say things like baked potato. Do you ever hear them say that? So it's they things that start with a p sound, they'll say it with a b sound, or the other way around. So that's not uncommon. The next pair of stop sounds, we have the t and d sounds. Say those sounds. Look in your t, d. So again, they're called a stop because it's one quick push of breath. Your tongue taps behind your teeth and it drops back down. What's the difference between the t and the d? Voicing. Which one's voiced? D. Yes. And so, again, children confuse these a lot. The last pair of, oh, I want to show you this. This was a classroom teacher, and she took a picture of the mouth and put it up here. I know that's hard to see on the chart, but in kindergarten, she was just talking about these sounds, and she took some pictures from her program, and she asked her children to say the name, and they had to post it. Was it under the t sound or the d sound? So just really practicing on how do I apply this in differentiating between these two sounds. Who's having difficulty? Who do I need to work with more in depth and practice this with more so that they can begin to recognize those sounds? So really using lots of pictures initially as we're talking about this and that awareness of sounds. And then I had this writing sample in January from a teacher, what I got for Christmas. I got this was the word necklace. All right, so we've missed the vowel sound, the ah. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. But look at how the k sound was spelled. Well, notice this is our last sound that's over here on our last pair of stop sounds. These are the k and the g sound. So the k sound and the g sound. So notice when you say the k sound, what's happening? Again, look in this one's harder to see when you look in the mirror, but if you look in the mirror and you say the k sound, notice what's your tongue doing? Which part of your tongue? Front, middle, or back? As you say, let me hear you say the sound. K, k, k. Which part of your tongue are you using? Front, middle, or back? So it's more the back and the middle and the back of your tongue that's lifting up and dropping back down. So it's the sound, the airflow is stopped. It's just a little bit of a push of airflow. The sound that's voiced when I turn my voice on, and I do that exact same thing, I get the g sound. So this child is demonstrating that confusion. This is a Spanish speaker, and I see this confusion a lot with our Spanish speakers. They've confused these sounds a lot, but I especially see it with the k and the g sound, which is pretty interesting to notice. So again, having pictures, I tell my students as we're working with this, the picture, it's hard to see, but the tongue is lifting up in the back of the mouth. Make your mouth look like my mouth. Look in your mirror and say that. I'm going to show you a couple of videos of teachers just introducing these sounds. So you don't have to be a speech pathologist to do this. This is just knowing about the phonology of our language and how to introduce these things. But seeing here, the first grade teacher was able to say to this student, I see why you might spell necklace that way. Let's talk about the difference between the k and the g sound. So she was able to point that out to the student as they looked at their sound wall and saying, that makes sense. First of all, telling your students and validating their thinking. That's really important because you want them to attempt to write and to try things. So that makes a lot of sense. Let me show you why you're having confusions. And then having them contrast some lists with the k sound and the g sound so they can learn to differentiate between those two, the voicing. Our next set of sounds are called nasals, and that's because the airflow comes through your nose. So the first sound is what are you doing with your mouth when you make that sound? Your lips are together, just like the p and the b sound. So you'll notice, I know you can't see this, but that sound is right underneath the p and the b because this is made with our lips together. Say that sound and hold your nose. Everybody go. Ready? Can you do it? No, you can't, because that's a nasal sound. So the airflow comes through your nose. How about the n sound? Say that one. Where's your tongue now? It's behind your teeth. It's where I made that t and the d sound, but it stays there when I make that n sound. And same thing, I can't do it when I hold my nose because the airflow is coming through your nose. Another nasal sound. And then the last sound is So this is the back of my tongue lifting up, like the k and the g sound. So you'll notice on this chart here, the first 3 sounds that we talked about, our stops, those were 6 sounds. For 6 sounds and our stops, we now have 3 nasals, and they're made in the same places. When things are made in the same place in your mouth, kids easily confuse those. So that's insightful information to know, why are they having confusions. The more I know about this and know about our language, the more precise I can be in my corrective feedback. And when I can give good corrective feedback, we can clean up things that children are having confusions with, and we can move on to things that they need to be working on. The learning occurs more rapidly. All right. So airflow here. As I was making this picture, I was editing my slides the other day, and I really literally started laughing out loud because I thought, okay, it looks like they have whiskers or something. I know. But I was trying to show the air is coming out, and these are called fricatives, and there's friction in the airflow. So the first pair of sounds, we have let's say the first sound on the slide. The first sound is what? Now turn your voice on and say the second sound. So I have the f and the v sound. So my teeth are on my lips as I'm making that sound. Do you feel it tickling when you say the v sound? And it's so interesting. I'll have lots of adults say to me, that's the v sound. No, it's not v, it's v. And sometimes m, the m sound. No, it's m. So really being aware of these sounds. And again, but now we have friction in our airflow. So the f sound, here's a picture of the child making the sh sound. So say sh, sh. What's causing the friction? Your tongue, your teeth, or your lips when you say that sh sound? What do you think? You feel your tongue lifting up? And the air is kind of being blocked by that as you're lifting up your tongue, and maybe your teeth are blocking some of that airflow. So that's creating friction. These are continuous sounds. So when I say the sh sound, I can keep that sound going, which is different from the t sound that I had to stop. So fricatives are continuous sounds, and there's friction in them. The other sound with the sh is the zh sound. Everybody say that. Zh. That's a weird sound. It's a sound from the French language, and it's a sound that we don't have a spelling for. When we say zh, we talk about different types of literature, and that's called what? Genre. And we have that zh sound in the word genre. I know a lot of people that avoid saying genre because they're not exactly sure what you're supposed to say when you see that G there. Is that a j sound or a zh sound? What are we saying here? But how about the word vision? Say vision. Can you identify the zh sound? Third sound in the word vision. How about measure? Measure. You hear that zh sound? Treasure. So that zh sound, it shows up. How about camouflage? Say camouflage. Do you hear that at the end? That zh sound? That's a French word that has that GE that says the zh in it. So those are fricatives. There's friction in the airflow. Here we have the f and the th sound. So we're sticking our tongue out. Make that, look in your mirror and say the unvoiced f and then th. And th. You feel the vibration, it tickles your lips when you say that voice. Th. And both of those sounds are spelled the same way. So the only way we identify that is I've underlined that here to show that. The other pairs, s, z. You guys say those for me. S, z. What's blocking the airflow? What's causing the friction? Tongue, teeth, And we said the and then here's the last one that we've put into this fricative column. It's the sound. Everybody say that. So there's not any real friction felt, but it's our speech paths tell us and our linguists tell us that there's those articulatory areas in your throat are causing some friction in the airflow as you're saying that sound. So we've put that in the fricative category. I want to show you a video of it. Oh, well, here we have a teacher, and you can see her in her small group. She's working, talking about the sound. You'll notice she has the print to connect to that sound as she's teaching that, but also the kids are posting words on their sound wall, and they're really focusing on that sound as she's teaching that. So this idea of I'm making all these connections as I'm introducing these sounds. Here's a teacher, and she's introducing this.
Look at how the teeth, do you guys see the tongue in this?
Yeah.
The tongue is out.
A tiny bit.
A little bit. Is your sound right now voiced or unvoiced?
Unvoiced.
Can you make the TH sound with a voiced? Do you see it? So we're going to be practicing this later today. We're going to get mirrors and see if we can make our mouth like this. Oh, follow directions, please. We're going to see if we
This
can
is
make
real,
our
isn't it?
mouth.
Kids that are always doing something.
When I try to do the mouth voice, I can't do that very well.
Well, you're saying your unvoiced doesn't sound very, you can't hear it? That's because there's like no voice, it's just air. So you're actually doing it right.
So again, I think that one of the challenges that I find from teachers is they say, I don't know how to begin. It's this simple. It's just thinking about starting to describe what is your mouth doing, getting kids to think about it, using some mirrors to look at your mouth when you're saying these sounds, and then using some list of words that have those sounds to make those connections, and post some of those words underneath the sound on the sound wall as we've shifted there. Here are the teachers teaching this and the zzz. She's really focusing on the zzz.
Make the same mouth that you do with the S, but turn your voice on. You might want to put your hand on your next to your ear. Are you ready? Letter is Z, sound is Z. Oh my goodness. Raise your hand if you would like to show off your Z sound. You think your mouth is just so perfect and your voice is on just wonderfully. You would like to model the Z sound like in zebra. Who would like to model it? Okay, let's hear it. Leah. Oh, that's a great Z sound. Who else would like to model it? Sophia. Oh, I hear her voice is on. Great job. Nice
And
mouth.
she has these
Jill.
nice procedures already set up, like when you cut off the sound and how to do that. So you can see that she's been working with this a lot. And again, it's just getting the kids to notice these things, that first introduction, and then we'll have more and more practice as we have lists that we can compare the sound, the unvoiced sound and the voiced sound. Can you identify these sounds as we're making these connections? So, all right, the next set of sounds are what we call affricates. So it's a quick push of breath with friction. This is a stop sound. So say the ch sound. Ch. Look in your mirror. What are your lips doing? Are they flat or are they rounded? Ch, ch. They're rounded. They're rounded. And do you feel, what's your tongue doing? Is the tip of your tongue doing anything, or is it kind of the middle of your tongue? Ch. Yeah, it's kind of in the middle of the mouth. You feel your tongue kind of lifting up a little bit. It might not be touching the top of your mouth, but your tongue is definitely moving. It's creating some of that friction in the airflow as you say the ch sound. Now say the voice sound. It's the j sound. And I think for me, the most fascinating thing was understanding, why do kids write a J instead of for a ch, a CH, and I couldn't understand why that happened until I started learning these things. And then I thought, oh my gosh, they're not confusing J and CH, they're confusing ch and j, which makes perfect sense with the ch and the j sound. Now that I know, what am I feeling? Let me tell you all, one other little thing that happens if you work with kindergarten through 2nd grade, you see this a lot. So when you say your ch sound, your lips are rounded, right? You can look in your mirror and say that ch. I'd like for you to look in your mirror and say the word desk. No, actually, let's start with a different one. Let's say nonsense word tane. Say tane. 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 Are your lips rounded or flat? Are they rounded like you say the ch sound? No, not quite when you say the t, when you start to say t. But I want you to say, get your mouth ready. Just look in your mirror and get ready to say train. What happens to your lips? They start to round. They look a lot like the ch sound. Do you guys ever have kids that write CH for TR? They're going from speech to print. They're going with what they feel their mouths doing because they're the scientists. They're the ones that know. And they're thinking, this is what I feel happening in my mouth, and so I'm going to try to write that sound down. And they actually say, you'll frequently hear them say train instead of train. So learning to segment those sounds. And again, when they write a CH for TR, you say, good for you. That makes lots of sense. I see why you might do that because it does make sense phonologically. But when we spell, this is how we spell it. And I'll segment the word train, t, r, a, n, and then I'll write it down and show them. The same thing happens with DR and the j sound. I had a 2nd grade teacher in the building I was working with in a couple of weeks ago, and she came to me and she says, okay, I have this student and we're segmenting the word drove, and he cannot hear a second sound in drove. He just keeps writing a J. And I said, first of all, you tell him, good for you. That makes sense, and then you start to segment it sound by sound and you write it down. This was 2nd grade, we're writing it down, we're looking at it. And she said, I went back and I did that, and all of a sudden he says, oh, that makes sense, teacher. But the validation is so important. I see why you would do that. Let's pull this apart. But when you feel your mouth and you say dry or drove, as they were using, it looks just like the j sound. And they'll say drive when they say those words with DR. So really noticing what's happening when we're having confusions for kids. The more we know about these little things, the easier it is to clean it up and to validate our students. So again, a quick push of air. This is called what kind of a sound? Affricate. So it has friction, but it stops, is what this is. All right, and then we have sounds that we call glides. So that airflow is gliding out. So we have the and the w sound. We don't actually say this sound anymore in the United States. Our kids have a really hard time spelling our WH words. Those really they have to become that visual memory. And then we have the y sound. And that y sound, I have some programs that teach ye, but I stick with the y. And your jaw is not dropping down when you're saying that sound. And this sound is a consonant sound that comes at the beginning of words. At the beginnings of words, it never comes at the end. This sound does not come at the end. If I have the letter Y at the end, it's going to be a vowel. So this y sound is only at the beginnings of words. The thing with glides, they glide into vowels. They will always have a vowel sound after it. So those are usually taught later in the school year when you're in teaching kindergarten and revisiting in 1st grade. I want to show you one teacher that was making the connections with her digraphs and helping the kids to notice what's happening with their mouth as they're saying these sounds, and doing some comparisons there. Being able to draw your attention to what's the difference between these sounds as I'm producing these sounds. So I just thought it'd be helpful to stick some of these connections in for your classrooms. And then the last 2 sounds on our consonant charts, we have the l sound. Say that sound. L. Put your tongue behind your teeth. Look in your mirror as you say that sound. How would you describe that to a student? What are you doing? What are you doing with your tongue? You're lifting it behind your teeth, and is it staying there? Yeah, it is. But we call these liquid sounds because they move around. So when you say a word, when you say a phrase like little girl, when you say little, you feel the "l" right behind your teeth in little. But say little girl. Now, where's the final sound when you say girl? Is your tongue right behind your teeth? No, it's moved around. So these two sounds, the "l" and the "r" sound, they're slippery. They move around in your mouth. They're not as solid to identify yet those features, and because they move around and they feel different depending upon where they are in a word. So our children oftentimes they leave these sounds out, and with our blends we'll see that they leave those out, or they put them in places where they don't belong because they're trying to figure out what is that sound. All right, so let's see if you guys can tell me if we have a stop sound, nasal, fricative, affricate. I'm going to give you a sound. It's your little quiz, and you're going to hold up the number of fingers to represent which one it is. So if I say the k sound, which one is it? Hold up your fingers. Is it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or you'll need 6? Okay, I've got it. We've got the k. It's a stop sound. Good job. And the next sound is the z sound. Everybody say that sound? Z. Is that a stop, nasal, fricative, affricate? I'm going to tell you it's one of those 4. So I see lots of 3s. You're right, that's a fricative. All right, our next one is the n sound. N. All right, I see lots of 2s. Yes, that's our nasal sound. And then we have the sound j, the j sound. J. So that's the one we were just looking at. That's the affricate. It's a quick push of air that has some friction in it when we make that sound. And then we have, let's try the y sound, as in yellow. Y. Anybody remember what that's called? All right, nice. That's a glide. That glides into a vowel sound. So whenever I have that y consonant sound, there will always be a vowel after it. And then the last one is the l sound. L. What is that? Yeah, it's our liquid. It's the one that moves around a lot. So, all right, good job. How many phonemes do we have in English, in the English language? 44, nice job. How many of those are vowels? 17? Anybody else? More or less? When we say 17 vowel sounds, 17, there's actually 18. We're going to go with 18. But when you think about vowel sounds, what do you think of? Think of 5. You think of A, E, I, O, U, right? Okay, but then I think, okay, there's short sounds and long sounds, so that's 10. What else do we have? We have diphthongs, and then we have our vowel teams that sometimes make a long or a short sound, but we have a couple of other things that happen. Oh, here's my irritable vowel syndrome. You're just a bunch of stupid consonants, and no one who plays Scrabble likes any of you. My irritable vowel A. So our vowel sounds, they can be made in the front, the middle, or the back of the mouth. And here's what happens with our vowel sounds is your tongue and your teeth don't get involved, and your lips, they don't get involved a lot. It's just an opening of the mouth. And that's why it's so difficult to identify vowel sounds. And here we have our vowel phonemes, and they're arranged according to sound, the opening of the mouth, I should say, the opening of the mouth. So when a photographer says, we want to take your picture, say what? Cheese. So that E is the sound that's most closed. So we say all vowel sounds are open, and I just have my mouth open a little bit with a nice smile, and there's voicing. All of your vowel sounds are voiced. So my consonants are not all voiced. Some are voiced and some are unvoiced. All of my vowels are voiced. I have to have voicing to give me that sound. And we say every syllable has to have a vowel, and that's because of the voicing in order to give that voice. So the way this chart is organized, when you look at this, and if you'll watch my mouth as I say these sounds, E, I, A, I, ah. Did you notice how my jaw just started to drop down? And then we go from ah, o, oo. So you start to close your mouth and round your lips. So tight smile down to the doctor sound, and then we start rounding as we go back up the back of the chart. We have our diphthongs, oi and ow. And then I don't have visual pictures of r, and or. Those, because it was really hard. Let me tell you guys, getting pictures of kids' mouths, trying to freeze the sound, it was really tough. But the r, or, I just put up that print there to show that r, or. And then our one oddity is our schwa sound that can say an or an I sound. So arrangement of the vowel sounds. This, it gets really tricky for children. And initially in first grade, I have my teachers where they're just teaching those short vowel sounds. And so this is a sound while in a classroom when they're learning that ah sound and then the ah sound. One of the things that we highly recommend is make sure when you're introducing your vowel sounds that they're far apart on the chart. If I'm teaching sounds, if I'm teaching ah, so you guys say those two sounds, ah. Look in your mirror and say those sounds. Short E, as in edge, and ah as in apple. Ah. Well, how much does your mouth move? Not much, not much. So why do kids confuse when they write bed, they write B-A-D, or they write bad and they write B-E-D? Because I'm trying to figure out ah. It's really hard to differentiate between those two sounds, and I need a lot of practice with those. So really, the more conscious we are about these sounds, the more sense you can make of why children are having those confusions, and thinking about when I introduce these sounds, I don't want to put and ah in the same lesson, or maybe not even weeks back to back together. I want to introduce those several weeks apart because I want to practice one sound and a good contrasting sound like ah, in between introducing another sound that's going to be very similar. So thinking about that as you're introducing vowel sounds, why do kids have these confusions? I want to back up and say something else. How many of you guys have Spanish speakers in your schools? Well, you know how many vowel sounds there are in Spanish? Anybody know? 5. There's 5 vowel sounds in Spanish. So I'm a Spanish speaker and I'm learning the English language, and you're saying tap out the word, let's see, we're going to say the word tap, app. Ah is not even a sound that's in my language. And now you're asking me to tap this out and identify a sound for you. I need lots and lots of practice and lots of repetition with that sound. The letter A is in my language, in Spanish, but the A in Spanish says the ah sound, right? So really thinking about why do kids have these confusions. I know you guys also have many other languages that are in your schools. I was just in Utica, Michigan last week, and their most common language is Arabic. And I said, you know, I finding out what the vowel sounds are and helping kids to make connections, and then being very focused on introducing our sounds. What sounds do we have that match their sounds, and what sounds do I need a lot of practice with, because those don't exist in my language, because I'm going to have to develop that phonemic awareness. And the more cueing you can give me to concretize those phonemes, and I can think about it and I can attach something to that, the more likely I am to retain this and hold on to that information. So you can see this teacher as she's posted the charts, the vowel charts in her classroom. And I want you all to notice, I don't know if on this one, this is in a first grade classroom. So she's introduced the sounds. I thought I had one with a whole vowel wall here. She's introduced the sounds, but she is not introducing all the spelling. So they can work with I. So when I tap the word like, I, k. So I know that sound, but I have, I don't have to teach the spellings to that. So that's something that's also kind of an insight that, I'm only teaching short vowels in kindergarten, beginning first grade, but I'm actually working with all of the sounds. So we had to really work on noticing that, and we just put up the pictures with keywords so they could connect to that sound, because when kids are trying to figure out when I'm making that sound, what does my mouth look like? And it's amazing to watch kids walk over and make their mouth look like the mouth and match the picture and then select the spelling, because kids go from speech to print, and that's what we want them to think about as we're putting this together and giving them insight into these spelling patterns and into the speech sounds of our language. Here's a second grade teacher where she has the whole vowel valley up. She has her schwa up there, and she's revisiting this over and over again. This was in a school in El Paso, Texas, a high number of EL students. So really lots and lots of review and practice with these sounds. And of course, by second grade, you've introduced almost all the vowel spellings, which is really crazy when you think about how much you have to learn initially in kindergarten, first and second grade about the language. So the more insight you have as a teacher to draw kids to think about the phonemes of our language, the more efficient you can be in your instruction. So I say focus on phonemes and articulation, using those articulatory gestures, the mouth movement, processing favors those gestures, helping them to hold on to things. This statement, sounds are ephemeral and disappear as soon as they are heard. When I read that in a research paper, that was what really got me going on developing sound walls and the pictures and things like that, because I thought, okay, that makes so much sense. You say a sound and it's gone. But if I have a picture of what my mouth should look like when I say that sound, I have something to anchor it to, and that makes sense. And then I have the print to anchor it to, and I can begin to match that up for that automaticity, which is going to get me to my sight word and my fluency, my sight word recognition and my fluency. That's my goal as I'm doing this. So our mouth positions are tangible, can be felt, viewed in a mirror, and analyzed by learners. You do not have to be a speech pathologist to talk to your kids about these things and just draw their attention. You probably do that anyway, but being more conscious of how to do that. Here's some kids, these are third graders we were working with, and they were still confusing. So the sound, another sound that doesn't exist in Spanish. The I in Spanish, when I say yes in Spanish, I say C. The I says E. And every time these little boys were seeing the letter I, they had great confusion. So we started talking about the I sound. And I said to them, you know what, you guys, in Spanish, you don't have an I sound. And every time you see I, you want to say E. And they said, why didn't somebody tell us this sooner? They're like, we're in third grade. But it was such an insight for them to understand why they were having the confusions and making sense of the language. And then, of course, they started playing What's My Sound? So as they're holding up the mouth picture, you have to tell me all the features of what my sound is, and I have to guess what's on my card. So that was really fun that they started creating those games as they're playing with this, and they're trying to make sense of this because now they're describing the features of the sounds and really attending to those things as we were playing with the language. So as I've said, adding graphemes, adding the print to the sound walls, you want to do that, teaching one concept at a time. This is probably through a spelling list. If you use spelling list, you don't want to introduce all the spellings for I at the same time. And so introducing one spelling pattern, covering up other spelling patterns, or just writing down the spellings as you're matching them to the sounds, using mouth pictures to support an existing program, practice through application of specific grapheme linking to a phoneme. Other sessions that are here, I'm sure they'll be talking about things like phoneme grapheme mapping. Most everybody knows word sorts, but a word sort focusing on a specific sound and the spelling pattern, building words using a specific pattern, or word chaining, which is kind of like building words, but I'm building different words with letter tiles based on a focused sound and a spelling pattern for that sound. Introduce words, add them to the wall. Focus on phonemes, mapping them to the print, the graphemes, Practice blending phonemes together to read words, not flashing words on cards. One of the things with flashcards is that, and we've all used flashcards, I know. My teachers use flashcards. I'm pretty sure my mom's teachers use flashcards too. It's kind of like the thing that we've always done. But what happens when I'm flashing words on cards, like I'm flashing a word on a card and a student doesn't know it, sometimes I just set it aside. Sometimes I say sound it out. And then I'll say, what word? Like they're supposed to know it instantly. So when I'm reading, I'm not sure what you want me to do. Am I supposed to sound it out? Do I just skip it? You set it aside when I couldn't read it. So what kind of messaging am I getting when we're doing the flashcards? What should we be doing? Whenever possible, we should work on sounding out our words. And I want you guys to think about this as you're teaching sight words, if you have a sight word list, organizing those words by vowel sound. What if you took all the short A words and put them together? So I have and had, and that, and we focused on the ah sound, and I blend those sounds together because most of those words are not things that I have to know by heart. They're not irregular. They're words that are regular for reading. So what if I grouped all my short E words and all my short I words? What if I grouped all the words with TH? And then, yes, I know we have go and see and like early on, but teaching kids about go, that the O says O, not just visually having to say go when I see those squiggles, those circles, and those lines. Because otherwise, it's trying to memorize an image and not anchoring that sound to the print. So thinking about how that works. Review sounds daily. Develop a chant or a routine. I still need to get a video of teachers doing that as they're reviewing the sounds. And as we're focusing on phonemes and graphemes, thinking about meaning also. So in a classroom where they were working on the N sound and they were spelling with KN, and so we had not and not. But noticing that those words not, know, and knew, the KN words, also went under the N sound because that's the first sound, not under the letter K. Because that doesn't, like, if I'm looking for no under K, now I'm really confused because I'm thinking about N. So thinking about how we can match these up and talking about meaning also is a way to give insight into students as you're moving into those patterns that are oftentimes confusing. And again, you'll see here the spellings have been covered up because they haven't been introduced yet. And we start to unveil those spellings once they're introduced and adding words for patterns that we can make connections to. So, phoneme awareness, letter recognition. How does a word become a sight word? Do you guys have a better insight into that? Thinking about they have to know letter names and they need to be phonemically aware in order to do that. Why do poor readers have limited sight word vocabularies? Because I'm probably missing one of those two things, my letter naming knowledge, and I'm always surprised by how many, even fifth graders, that when I'll say, name the letters of the alphabet, that they're not sure all the time. And that's kind of shocking, like how did they get here? But that's not something we typically assess after first grade, maybe second grade. But if that's missing for kids, what else is missing in their gaps in understanding? So hurdles to sight word automaticity, letter knowledge, segmentation, all the way to manipulation, the top step of that continuum. Emphasizing the articulatory gestures so we can get to sight word acquisition. Because sometimes our classes look like this. So our goal is to remove the hurdles for our students altogether so that they're not stumbling and falling down and knowing how to provide that good first instruction and thinking about how to move from the speech to the print. So I've already talked to you guys a little bit about orthographic mapping, and I know it's time to wrap up, and we're all on our own for lunch. So I'm going to say things that you, as a teacher, be smarter than your program and understand how the language works. I hope you'll leave this session with a deeper understanding and thinking you can go out and do this and try this, practicing working with the spoken sounds, understanding the written system, phonology, and using assessments to combine these elements with good instruction. So Your skills, those become integrated as acquisition proceeds, and we have to move through those phases of development that I started off with. Phonemic awareness and our understanding of phonics develops to that vocabulary and deeper understanding of words. And our goal is to get to that orthographic mapping, what I call the teeter-totter, the tilt, when I move from learning to read to learn. That's what we're actually headed for here. So I want to thank you all for your time and for being here in the session. My email, mary@toolsforreading.com. I'd love for you to go on Facebook and like our page. I have a website too. If you want to look at that and look for more information, you're welcome to do that. So thanks, you guys. I appreciate it. And